everyone. Welcome to this workshop, and thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. And apologies that we're running a little bit late. I'd love to know either what's the last animal you've seen, if you could just sort of drop that in the chat, or if you're happy to let me know whereabouts you're joining us from, because it's always great to know with these online events where people are. In the meantime, if you are joining us, if you could make sure that you have with you a sheet of paper, a pencil, or a pen, but preferably a pencil, a ruler, a pair of scissors, some objects to draw, and optionally, you could also have some colour with you. So those could be colour pencils or some felt tips or markers. I absolutely love that someone is watching from the beach and just found a decorator crab. That is like amazing. You are my people. Also, I love that the other response is a beetle, which is absolutely brilliant. Thanks so much, everyone. So as Owen said, I'm Hana Ayoob. I am a science communicator and I'm an illustrator. And I am particularly interested in and passionate about how drawing is actually a really important and sometimes overlooked part of science and a way of observing the world around you. I've always drawn pretty much since I first picked up a crayon, and although I eventually did a science degree, I sort of drew all the way through it, which is something I will talk about a little bit later. Today we're going to make ourselves a little zine, so I will just switch to my tabletop camera. So we're going to make ourselves a little zine that looks a little bit like this. And inside we're going to sort of fill it with a few different drawing exercises. And through all of this, we're going to focus not so much on how pretty our drawing is, but more on sort of capturing specific details and capturing some of the sort of things that you might find interesting if you were a scientist studying something. So you might be wondering what a zine is. So sometimes they're these sort of simple little booklets. Other times they can be a little bit more complicated. The definition is really loose, but generally it is a little informal sort of self-published magazine. And I really love making them because I feel like there is a lot of different variety in what you can make, and there's room to sort of fill them with all sorts of different things. So, you know, there's the zine that we're sort of going to make today. There's a little one here that I made, which is about how rhinologists don't study rhinos, they study our noses. This one's about my favourite fruit in Singapore, which I haven't quite finished yet. And there's a little one about shapes of summer. I also recently found these that I made as a kid, which I think are just make me laugh so much because they're so similar to what I now make sort of 3 decades later. Please do, if you've got any questions at any point, just let me know in the chat. If you want me to slow down, speed up, anything, just give me a shout. So we're going to make ourselves our zine. So you need an A4 sheet of paper, and then if you could fold it lengthways, so like up like that. Try and be sort of as neat as you can, but if you're a little bit off, that's absolutely fine. And then fold it inwards that way. Then fold the 2 sides into the middle. And I'll repeat this again, so don't worry too much if you're getting a bit sort of left behind. Then fold it in half like that. And then we're going to cut from this point to this point, and just make sure that you're cutting on the side that is folded, not the side that's sort of the 2 loose sides. So fold like this. fold lengthways again and sort of squidge it together so you have a bit of a hole in the middle, and then flatten it, and you will end up with a little booklet like this that has sort of 6 pages inside of it, as well as your front cover and your back cover. So if you got that the first time, you might want to start decorating your front cover. So you could write out the title of the workshop, Powers of Observation. You could write something else, you know, it could be your name and what's going to be inside it. But I will go over that again in case anyone didn't get it. So we are going to fold up lengthways like that. Open up and fold across. Fold into the middle. Then same again. And down the middle like that. Oops, not quite. Cut along that bit there. And then you put it up, squidge it together, and you have a little booklet. Now, before we sort of move on, I'm going to show you a few of my other favourite zines, just to show you sort of the potential that you can have here. So this is a little one on bunny behaviour by an artist called Lindsay Green. And this actually uses the same format as the zine that we're going to be making today. So you have your pages. And then you can actually also open it up and do something on the other side. And I'll give you some ideas about that at the very end of the workshop. Here is another one by Lindsay Green, which is about foxes, which is a bit more, you know, like a booklet. This is a little one about how life is a carnival that's quite similar to the one that we're making as well. One on seagulls. And anyone who's got kids or is just into, you know, fun science yourself, because why not? These by Cutie and the Feast are absolutely brilliant. They're sort of little zines that are full of science experiments and things like that. So, as I sort of mentioned before, I am really fascinated by how art and science can come together. So I did a science degree, but I very much feel like I sort of got through the whole thing by drawing everything. So I would draw in my notes, during lectures, I would draw everything in the lab, I would sketch out skeletons in the zoology museum that was attached to the department I was in. And all through it, it sort of made me realise that drawing, the way I was observing things, it really helped me to process science and to understand things. And especially when you're really paying attention to texture, colour, size, shape of things. Observing all of that is a really important part of becoming a scientist as well as being an artist. And over the last few years, I've really loved finding out about other people who have sort of straddled that divide, who have done both science and art. So there are scientists who drew as part of the science they did, but there are also people that we think of as artists who drew things that helped contribute to science as well. So I wanted to share some of my favourites with you. So first off, you've probably heard of Beatrix Potter, and if you have, you might know of her as a children's illustrator. So she wrote about Peter Rabbit and drew all these charming little drawings, and there's loads of other ones, including sort of Jemima Puddle Duck, and so many of these sort of adorable creatures that absolutely, I loved them when I was a child. But Beatrix Potter is lesser known for some of the other things she did, including drawing and recording loads of different fungi, mushrooms, plants, and animals, especially in the Lake District, and actually sort of discovering new species and recording things and being a scientist, basically, in the way that we would understand it today. Jemima Blackburn is another artist, and her work has an interesting link to Jenner, actually. So one of the things that Edward Jenner did was write a lot about the cuckoo, and he said that it was the cuckoo chick itself that would push other eggs or chicks out of the nest, whereas previously a lot of people had thought that it was the cuckoo parent that would fly back and sort of push other things out. But a lot of people didn't quite believe Jenner and didn't believe some of the other people who were saying this until Jemima Blackburn actually managed to draw this behaviour happening in the wild after observing it plenty of times. And then people started to believe that this was actually what happened. Another amazing scientist, so Santiago Cajal, he was a neuroscientist, and although he'd wanted to become an artist throughout his childhood, but he was pushed into science by his parents. But he drew all of these neurons, these cells that form connections in our brain and around our bodies. And he drew them again and again and again down the microscope. There are thousands of these drawings out there. And maybe because he was drawing them, that's what I like to believe, he actually spotted something that no one else had seen before, which was that there's an actual space between neurons, and that sort of chemical signals have to get across this space. And even after he discovered these, plenty of people, again, didn't believe that they existed, until many years later when microscopes were able to show that those spaces were there. Maria Sibylla Merian is an absolutely amazing illustrator. Lots of artists would argue that she's one of the greatest scientific illustrators that ever existed. She actually traveled across the world, and she was known for making these amazing drawings of insect life cycles. So right from how you get from an egg to, you know, perhaps a pupa, caterpillar, through to the adult who then lays eggs again. And her work was actually really important part of sort of kickstarting everything we now know about insects and their lives. And sort of last but definitely not least, the scientist artist that most people tend to know about is Leonardo Da Vinci, who drew so many different things and studied so many different things. But one of his really important works was a big statue of a horse. And he did lots and lots of observational drawings and sketches of real life horses because he wanted that statue to be as realistic as he could possibly make it. So there's all these people who've been working at this sort of intersection throughout history and who still do even today. And I find that really interesting. And so that's part of the motivation for why today we're going to put our powers of observation to the test, and we're going to draw a few different things. So the sort of things that you might want to draw are either things that you have around the house. So I've got myself sort of a little mug. Don't worry too much about how detailed things might be on the surface. We're focusing more on sort of overall shapes. The scissors you used earlier could be quite good as something to draw. And then we've also got things like, I've got a little tomato. I've also got a orange. Got a flower here, a little marigold. A sunflower head that's actually started to dry up and turn into sort of the seeds inside. And I've also got a sprig of holly. Now, if you're drawing with things from nature, be a little bit careful about sort of touching things and then maybe touching your face or eating anything, because for example these berries can be really poisonous, but I'm going to be very careful around them. So if you are a kid, make sure you talk to the parents around you or adults around you. So the first exercise we are going to do is a bit of a warm-up exercise. So we're going to do that on sort of half of your page here. I want you to pick one of your objects to draw. Pick something that is a little bit complicated. So, you know, maybe go for at least something a bit like a pair of scissors or a flower rather than an orange or a pencil. And we are going to try and draw something without taking our pencil off the page. So don't start yet, because we're also going to go with a bit of a time limit. So I want you to pick your object, get your pencil and paper ready. And when I say go, I want you to put your pencil somewhere on the page and draw that thing without taking your pencil off the page. So you have 3 minutes starting now. And with this exercise, you definitely should be just focusing on sort of shapes and maybe some of the lines you see. Don't worry at all about getting things perfect at this point, or even too accurate, to be honest. Give you maybe another 30 seconds. Okay, so we'll wrap up there. Do let me know in the chat sort of how you found that exercise, whether you enjoyed it or if you found it a little bit too tough. Now, because we are focusing on sort of observing today, even though that was a quick little sketch, I'm going to make some sort of notes about what it is. So I drew a holly sprig. I'm going to sort of label that those are berries. Those are the leaves. Okay, so I hope everyone sort of enjoyed that first exercise. So next we're going to sort of think a little bit about breaking down the shapes of what we're looking at, which can really help to when we're drawing sort of things that are maybe a little bit more complicated, is to break them down into the shapes that we are more familiar with. So things like circles and triangles, or squares and rectangles and things like that. So you might take something. So I'm going to draw a few different drawings on this page, but you might want to just go for a single page. So if we go for something like, this is a little tomato, that's quite easy. You know, you've got your circle there. I've got a little stalk that's an oblong. And then there are these sort of spiky green bits there. And then afterwards, you know, you might want to then sort of draw over with pen or with sort of darker pencil. And actually those bits are a bit more fluid. Okay. But say if we're drawing something a little bit more complicated, like this marigold flower, there are still ways that we can sort of use shapes to break it down. So, for example, if we look really carefully at the petals, they almost form a bit of a conical shape. So we've got that sort of circle at the top, and then everything sort of comes down together. And then we've got this bit here. And finally, a sort of sharp bit at the bottom. Not sharp, but a bit thinner. So that's sort of our very rough shape. And then we could go over it again, either with pen or with pencil, sort of being a bit, sort of, I guess, going a bit darker and heavier on the pencil line. So, and then go over this, just show in a bit more of that detail. So we've got these sort of bits around the center. And there are some ridges there. And then we can start to do sort of petals. And starting from those sort of simple shapes, you can build up something that's a lot more complicated, that might have been a shape that actually scared you a little bit when you started. So we can sort of do the same with, I'm going to just cut off one of these holly leaves, and you'd be able to do something similar here of maybe, you know, drawing the circle and then a line down the middle, and you would slowly be able to sort of flesh out that shape. Even something like a mug, depending on which way you look at it, you're going to see different shapes. So top down, you've got circles and then sort of smaller circle. If you go sort of from the side, it's more of an oblong, sort of rectangle, and then with the curve down the middle. So again, if we sort of broke that down, you can just sort of start with the curves, with the basic shape. So you've got that rectangle or square there, and then you have your curve down the side, and then you can sort of flesh it out a bit more. And that's how you can start sort of breaking down into different shapes. And those shapes can be really important even when you're sort of observing things for science as well, because it can sometimes show you what might be lying under the surface. So as you start, if you're drawing an animal, for example, and you break it down into shapes, you sometimes start to see what could be the skeleton or the muscle structure underneath. And sometimes if you sort of actually look up that skeleton or look up the muscle structure, there's lots and lots of resources available online. You can then see how those different forms, how the structure under the surface changes the shapes of what you're actually looking at. So if you're still here, still doing the exercises, do sort of let me know how you're getting on. Or if you've got any questions, just let me know. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at sort of measuring something and drawing from a sort of, when you're drawing from a scientific point of view, it can be really important to get the size right, to actually know the details of what you're drawing. So in this case, I'm going to draw a holly leaf, but I'm actually going to measure it and draw a box that is the same shape as the leaf first, and sort of get that down onto paper before we sort of draw that into place. So, and you could do this with anything. You could maybe do this with a pair of scissors, if that's something you'd rather do. So with the holly leaf, that is about 10 centimeters long and about 5 centimeters across if we include the points. So draw that in. Okay, so I'm also going to label that. Got 10 centimeters at the top and 5 centimeters down the side. And then I'm going to start sort of sketching out this shape onto the box that we're looking at. So you can see that the sort of stalk here is about halfway down that side, and it sort of curves up. And you can actually, you know, if you want to get things as accurate as possible, you can start to look at where the different points are, sort of where they hit the top of your box. But I'm going to do it a bit more sort of by freehand. It'd be great to know sort of what sort of objects you're all drawing, actually, if you're imagine if you're still on the beach, you could probably find some really interesting things to draw there. A glue stick, I love that. Probably just about the right size for this as well. Now, when you're drawing to observe, I might have mentioned this earlier, but you're not trying to make things sort of too pretty or too sort of, perfect even. It's more observing what's in front of you and making notes of what's in front of you. So, for example, I'm finding that sort of almost callus on this holly leaf is quite interesting. So, sort of added it to the drawing, not particularly prettily, and then you can sort of label it. So, now, I'm probably going to do a second one of these, so please don't feel that you need to sort of rush through your drawing at this stage. But sometimes if you are struggling to figure out whether you've got the shape correct on page, if you are not quite sure why something doesn't look quite right, shading in the space around it, the sort of negative space in your box, can help a little bit to see where things might have gone a bit awry. So I'm just going to do that sort of lightly with pencil. And adding that contrast can sort of help you see the shape a bit more clearly. And there you go, you can see sort of contrast between the leaf and the sort of darker space around it. One of the things I really love about drawing things in front of me is that you often sort of find, you notice things that you might not have noticed before. So I'm going to see, I'm not even sure if I'll be able to sort of show this on camera, but as I've been drawing holly leaves, because we've got a massive holly tree in our back garden, notice that the veins sort of loop around. So probably easier if I actually draw this on. The veins loop around in a way that you don't really expect them to, that they don't on many other leaves. And they also do it on the back as well. So they sort of go up and then down and down, which is something that I often find. So you start drawing and then you notice these little details that you never saw before, which is one of the reasons why drawing is so important in science, because if you're taking photos, you might never notice those details. But if you are actively drawing, looking at the thing, then putting pencil to paper or putting pen to paper, you start to capture these details that you might not do otherwise. Now, I'm also conscious that with this being streamed to Facebook, people might be joining at any point. So I'm just going to do another one of these drawings, but this time I'll use scissors, since we've got someone else online doing stationery. So these are, so we've got about 14 centimeters across, and that is about 7 centimeters up. Now, if you're drawing an object that doesn't fit on your page, one of the things that you could do is actually draw something to a smaller scale, or if you're drawing something really small, you might want to draw it to a larger scale. So I'm just going to do that now. So this was 14 by 7 cm. I'm going to pretend it doesn't quite fit on the page, and I'm going to scale it down. So I'm going to do sort of a 1 to 2 and do it at half the scale. So instead of 14 by 7, I'm going to do 7 by 3.5 centimeters. Going to measure, so that blade is about 7.5 cm on here, so it's going to be about 3.25 centimeters on here. It is very likely that I will get my maths wrong at some point whilst doing it live. And then that bit is just under 5. Sort of shading that in very roughly. So one of the points of the bounding box is meant to be to fill the whole thing, but I haven't done that here, possibly because I got a little bit confused by the thing that came off the end. But you sort of get the idea. So as I mentioned before, so you just the main things to remember about this are that size is really important, whether you're sort of doing it to scale, in the case of the holly leaf, or if, like with the scissors, you're sort of doing it to half scale. So I'm going to sort of move on to some of our other exercises. So one of the next things we're going to do is to draw something and focus either on the colour or on the texture. So I am going to try and draw this sunflower head, which is going to be a little bit complicated, but I might also I'm going to try and give this orange a go first to do something a bit simpler to show you. So first off, I'm going to label this page, so colour, texture. And if we're looking at the tangerine, the things that I notice are it's very orange. That's sort of the obvious sort of colour detail. But also on the texture, you've sort of got these dimples that are actually quite easy to sort of represent whilst drawing using some dots. So you can often just use dots or lines or different amounts of hashing to so hashing is sort of this type of thing, to show the texture or color or shadow on an object. So with the drawing this in, and then you can add those dots on top. So I'm sort of actually drawing these as like really tiny circles rather than dots, but you could also do dots. As always, let me know how you're getting on, and let me know if you've got any questions. And also, it's always good to know what you're drawing, because I'm really intrigued by what people might have found. Thanks, Gemma. So Gemma's saying that they're drawing the shells, the rocks, the beach, and the crabs. I'm actually quite jealous of like all the things that you probably have around you that you can draw there on the beach. Okay, so there's lots of different texture and things. If we're thinking about color, so I've got my color pencils. The thing I'm going to try and do before I just start coloring straight in is having a bit of a play with some sort of color swatches down the side to get the color right, because so I can see sort of part of this tangerine, especially with the light, is quite similar to that orange, but other parts are a bit more yellowy. So if I overlay the yellow and the orange, you sort of get slightly different colors. Not sure if you can see that on camera. And sometimes, especially if you are drawing sort of out and about on the beach or anywhere else sort of in nature, you might not have the time to colour in a whole drawing, but you might want to just make these swatches down the side instead. So I'm going to go ahead and colour mine in. Add in a bit more yellow top. And I also want to capture some of these sort of marks and things that there are on it. And now I'm going to try and draw this sunflower head, which is so detailed that it is scaring me a little bit. But I'm going to use some of the techniques that we sort of covered earlier. So I'm going to draw it top down. That back. That. So I'm going to break it down. Got the circle first. And then I've got that sort of slightly outer circle of the leaves. And if I look at the sort of seed head, I notice there's this bit in the middle that's a little bit denser, but it's not quite exactly in the middle. Roughly put that in there. Start drawing in these leaves on the outside. Now this sort of bit up here, I'm going to just sort of shade that in a bit because it's so sort of dense. I'm not quite sure I'm going to be able to get the detail in the time we've got, but I'm going to shade it in a bit of a sort of circular way so it represents a little bit more the seeds that I can see. going to draw in all the other individual seeds on this, because I think that is probably going to bore me a little bit, let alone everyone who's watching. But I hope you're all having fun drawing your objects at home. Now, there's quite a nice acronym to think about when you are focused on scientific drawing, and I'm just going to write myself a note on the back of my zine, so I've got that handy. So it goes A, B, C, D, E, E, A, B, C, D, E, just the one E. It's quite easy to remember. So the A stands for accurate. And I think, as I've mentioned a few times, that isn't necessarily accurate in a gorgeous picture that looks exactly the same as the thing in front of you. It can just be things like capturing the veining on the leaf correctly, or marking in that there was a callus on it. Or, you know, adding little lines, or trying to make sure that you've got the colour correctly. It's more about making sure that you sort of have a good record of what you've seen. The B stands for big. So I know we're working on quite a small canvas and quite a small zine today, but normally if you were drawing something as a scientific record, you might want to keep it big. Colourful. Detailed. And explained. So that's where you might want to add those notes. So for example, with this one, that's sort of the green leafy bits. Very scientific, I know. To say sort of dense center, and this could be sort of individual seeds. Now, as I mentioned back at the beginning, when we're sort of making our zine or showing some of the examples, we also have a much bigger page in here if we open out the inside. So if you're working on another drawing at the moment, feel free to sort of keep doing that. I'm going to take this sprig of holly and try and use all the different sort of things that all the different little exercises I've gone over, and add them all together. So just to remind myself, we've sort of got shapes, we've got measurement, and then we've got colour plus texture. This is not the easiest thing to measure, but I'm going to try, roughly at least. So I think that is about 20 centimetres, and very roughly that is about maybe 16 centimetres across. I draw myself a pretty big bounding box for this one. Is there anything anyone's been finding particularly tricky to draw so far? Okay, so I've got my box. I'm going to add my measurements on. 20 cm by 16 cm. Then I'm going to start sort of just drawing in some rough lines and shapes. So rather than focusing too much on the detail at this point. So that's sort of the stalk. I've got all the berries down here. Keep like getting a bit confused about whether that tomato is attached to the holly or not. Also going to sort of count to myself what I've got. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Put a bit of the way up. We've got roughly marking those leaves. So I've got a very rough outline of the sort of holly there, and then we can start adding in some detail. The sort of the berries, that the size that this is at is quite, they're quite small, but there's actually some really interesting detail on there. So I'm going to just almost do one berry slightly bigger than scale. So if we do, I'm going to do that twice as big. So that's about 1 centimetre by slightly under 1 centimetre. I'm going to do myself a box that's about 2 by 2. And add some notes as well. So there's a cross shape at the top. Grooves down from the cross. And since we were thinking about colour as well, I'm going to just cut that one in. Back and add onto the detail of this bigger drawing. Sometimes you will find, as I'm finding, that things have just sort of not quite where they need to be. And the slightly more spiky details of this leaf. I'll leave you to draw for a bit, and I'm just going to see whether there's actually been any photos shared on Twitter that I might be able to show you on screen. I can't see anything just yet, but if the Dr. Jenner's house team are there and you've got any that have been sent in that you'd like to share, do just let me know at any point, and perhaps we can get those up on screen via your computers. So if we've only got about 15 minutes left, so if anyone's got any questions, or if there's any questions from the Facebook stream that Owen or Kazia might be able to pass over, do let me know. Wanted to let you know sort of a few more ideas of things that you could do if you want to sort of get into sort of slightly more detail. So something you might want to do, especially with sort of objects from nature, like a flower, is you might want to start sort of almost dissecting it. And the slightly safer way that you can do this before you get any sharp objects out is to actually just start sort of pulling petals off. So, and you can already start to see something interesting. I don't know if there'll be enough focus here, but you can see that this isn't just a petal, it's actually got these sort of other parts to it as well. Marigolds are actually compound flowers, which means this isn't a single flower, it's lots and lots of smaller flowers that are joined together. And if you are old enough to use a knife safely, or you have someone who can cut something for you, you can even you can cut apart flowers, you can cut apart fruit, and you can look at the inside of it. So I'm going to see if I can actually do this with a pair of scissors, because I haven't got a knife with me. So that sort of worked. And then you have a cross section that you can then draw. And you can see all these little individual flowers that I mentioned earlier inside that plant, and you can sort of sketch different things and different bits of it. You can do the same, like I said, with fruit in the house. Maybe not the best thing to do with a glue stick if that's what you're drawing, but lots of other details and things that you can actually find inside things. Unless anyone's got any questions, I'm going to sort of keep adding to my holly drawing. And I hope that you're all sort of having fun drawing things and picking out some maybe slightly different details, or noticing things that you haven't noticed before. Something I do quite a lot when I'm drawing is I'll pick something up and then put it back at a slightly different angle and then worry why everything's moved. But that's sort of what I mean by with accuracy. You sort of want to generally capture what you see in front of you, but it doesn't need to be perfect. You can still accurately sort of depict a holly branch, even if the leaves aren't in exactly the same place as on the branch that's in front of you. Start rubbing out some of those guidelines from the beginning. So still adding in those details. So in this case, that leaf is sort of the top of the leaf, and these are the underside. But hopefully you can see how, you can start adding those simple shapes. You just do a line and the sort of very rough leaf shapes. The circles are the berries, and then as you slowly add more detail, you get sort of more and more layers added to it. And then if you actually start adding a bit of color, doing this very roughly at the moment. You start to have something that you could actually maybe use to help you identify the same plant or the same species again in the future. I'm gonna just do a bit of color swatching at the side. You can start to look at some of the more subtle colour differences. So for example, the underside of the leaf is a bit lighter. With something like colour pencils, you're a bit limited in how many different shades you can get, even by sort of overlaying them. But if you say you had a watercolour set with you, you could actually mix your colours and get some colours that are a lot more accurate. So we've got about 5 minutes left, so do let me know if you've got any more questions, or if you just want to let me know how you've got on, or if you shared any pictures with us anywhere. Owen, if you're still there, if you want to sort of pop back in at any point before past to say anything about the rest of the event, please do feel free to. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon, everyone. Can I just remind you again of those, if you're drawing for sort of observation and science, just remember your sort of A, B, C, D, E. Hi, Owen.
Hi, Hannah. Thanks so much. Please do continue with your A, B, C, D, E, and then I can pop on and
that's all right.
I don't want to interrupt you.
No, don't worry. So just remember that you want to make things accurate, but not necessarily perfect. Draw things sort of big so you can see the detail. Add colour using colour pencils, felt tips, watercolours. Make sure that everything's detailed, and also make sure that you add explanations. If there's anything that you're going to forget after you've finished drawing something, add some notes for yourself there. That's me done.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you very much, everyone who's joined us. And we'd love to see your drawings. So if you are able to take photos, please do continue to share them. We're on social media at Dr. Jenner's House. You can also email us info@edwardjenner.co.uk. If you want to use hashtags, use hashtag Discover Jenner. We're sort of coming to the end of our Discovery Day at Home event now. We've got one more session. We've got Professor Giles Harrison and Simon King and Dr. Helen Ryder from the she's not Helen, she's Claire Ryder from the University of Reading, and they're going to be talking about clouds. So we've got all sorts of different clouds to discuss. People have been sending in their photos all through the weekend. If you've ever wondered what's going on with clouds, then do join us for this final session. Thank you very much, and thank you once again to Hana Ayoob for this amazing session. And I've certainly been scribbling away and inspired to get out and do a little bit more. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks so much for having me.